It's Pill Pod. We are podcasting messages of hope and delusion into the void.
Flick your balls a little bit.
It's your Friday critical theory or philosophy or hour of lib takes podcast, depending on your perspective. Although we are down a lib today.
Yeah.
It is I, Victor, and Eric.
Hello.
I am outnumbered by the radicals.
The postmodern neo-Marxist your daddy warned you about.
More radical.
How's the mood? How's the temperature? I don't really want updates on your life, but I'm in one of my biannual depressive states, and I think it was caused by watching The Matrix and Spider-Man.
They were that bad, eh?
Also, all the trailers before Spider-Man, which were 100% for sequels or remakes. That's the future.
I get the Matrix, but what's got you down about Spider-Man?
Mostly that there are no films anymore. There's nothing. The films are gone. We're just left with content, and I am asked to like it and enjoy it.
By who?
By, the big other.
Oh, I see.
I did not
the compelled
watch it.
enjoyment of mediocrity. Well, you know the premise, right?
Well, no.
Sony just used all of their IP to try to make like a Marvel thing. And even though half of those Spider-Man movies suck balls, we're supposed to like them when they're all in the same movie together.
I don't know, man. I don't watch any of these superhero movies. The only superhero movies I watch are like the Batman ones when it was Dark Knight. And this new one, I guess. I don't know who's the new Batman in the new trailer. I don't know.
It's that
I think
the
I
vampire
have
movie guy.
Yeah, right.
Robert
I have just like
Pattinson.
a weird snobby attitude that I'm above superhero movies, so I don't watch them.
I think Into the Spider-Verse is definitely worth a watch, but I haven't seen the new one. But that one leaves you on a kind of hopeful note. I don't know about this new one.
I think boycotting superhero movies is what I have to do. Like I feel the compulsion because that is the thing that you talk about in the public commons, and we have so few avenues of public commons that superhero movies are one of the main publics that we have.
I guess so. Is that true? Yeah, I guess it is. I don't know.
I mean it's
I do
privatized. We don't have a political landscape, particularly in lockdown, but even outside of lockdown. So superhero movies and like the Super Bowl, a few of those things are the things that I participate in against my better judgment. But I think it's boycott
The Super Bowl,
time.
you participate in that?
I think I always watch it.
Really? I didn't know that. That's
For
funny.
the commercials.
That's kind of the only sport I watch all year is just the Super Bowl.
Football? That's funny. I had no idea that you watched any of that stuff. I feel like you've never said that out loud, or I've never heard you say that out loud.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
There's being infantilized. Maybe that's just what it's like to be 30, but the infantilization of everything. Baudrillard already talked about this in 1980, so maybe it's not.
How come you? By the way, how come you don't like the new season of The Expanse? Like I've been watching it and I think it's fine, but I remember last episode you just said you hated it. Is that another thing contributing to your depressive state?
They pulled a Game of Thrones.
Like Game of Thrones, it drew from good source material, and then the first few seasons were more careful about drawing from the source material and what made it good. Now The Expanse is just a plot show, and the plot isn't even that good. The nuances of politics, the characters' motivations, all of that is just gone now for some reason. So
Maybe because they're rushing it, I guess, because they're trying to like finish the show.
I guess, I don't know. Like there's like what 9 books in that series, and they're on, I don't know what season it is, 6. So I don't even know why they're opting to rush it. Maybe it's not popular enough, but
Yeah, maybe.
We've already done some stuff on superheroes.
yeah, back when we were talking about phenomenology, I think it definitely improved my state of mind, and now I'm just back on my phone and looking at what there is to talk about. And despite our best intentions, it appears we'll all just tread water in ideology fluid until we die.
I saw someone tweet, most podcasts are too long. And I wonder what we think about that.
Most podcasts in general, or most of ours are too long?
Just in general, this person was commenting on that. And I wonder I feel like the hour 15 that we usually hit seems like a reasonable number.
But why would you feel like you had to listen to the whole thing? Is this like the compulsion of the commons that I just brought up, that you have to finish it? If you're bored, go find another podcast.
I will say that I think that there's something, but sometimes I do feel like I'll see like some podcast episode come out or some discussion and it'll be like 2 hours and a half. And I'm just like, it makes me like not want to start. It's like in some ways there's just like, I think there's an intuitive appeal to like looking and being like, it's realistic for me to be able to fit that in and finish it, right? But to be like, well, I'll start it, and then like if I get through it, I'll just move on. If not, I'll move on. That's not as appealing, right? Like when I see it in my like feed, there's an intuitive appeal to being like, I can complete this, like a completionist appeal. But if I see something that's like too long, it's like it's a disincentive from even starting it, right? It's like I don't want to start this thing that's 3 hours. Like what? Like when am I? I'm just not even going to start it, right? So
sure, I think 3 hours is too long. But by the same token, when I see an episode that's 30 minutes, I'm also disincentivized to click on it because
I agree. 30 minutes
not a
is
big
too
enough
short.
block of time.
I can't imagine there'd be much substance in something like that unless it's really, really tight and quick. But
I would like some feedback from the audience about optimal lengths. I do think that we're pretty much hitting that sweet spot, but I just thought I would bring it up since I saw that.
Our conversation kind of dictates the length. It's almost like we're done talking at an hour and 75 minutes.
Yeah, the material is kind of, we just go, hey, if we said everything we want to say, okay, it's getting long anyway. But it depends on the format too, right? We have a conversational podcast where we need to fit 3 or 4 people's ideas into a segment. So, I mean, it shakes out to about an hour 15. But, you know, my listening habits are different, right? I put things on while I'm doing things. Like, for instance, I like to listen to like audiobooks through podcasting. And then I listen to David Harvey's Marxist lectures on Capital, and they're about 2.5 hours. So I throw it on, I go shopping. I don't sit down and be like, this is what's going to entertain me for the next hour and a half. I do things at the same time, which is how I assume is a major way people listen to podcasts. If you're just sitting there listening to it as a form of entertainment, then you get the same complaints about movies. Oh, that movie was too long. That movie was too short. I felt like they could have cut that down a bit. That's true. Depends on the format, really. Like maybe for our podcast, how long is a good time for this kind of podcast?
No, I agree. I think, I also fit in my listening habits kind of in the same way, but it's just, I'm usually not out and about, especially now with like more lockdowns, that long. So it's nice to be able to like have an episode that I can finish in that time usually, or at least be close to finishing it.
Hey, it's anything. You're doing laundry, you're cleaning dishes, you're walking the dog, you throw on your headphones and a podcast. Boom. If it's 2.5 hours, then you get a lot of work done. Maybe accidentally fall into a Twitter hole or something.
All right. Regardless of what you are doing, listener, laundry, walking your dog, today we are looking at a new word. We like to think of ourselves as your academic proxies. So we're going to start with a bit of academic critique. But the new word for the day is techno-feudalism, which has been making its way around, coming out of Yanni Varoufakis' mouth.
Yeah, Yanis Varoufakis.
Yanis Varoufakis.
Yanis is how you say it?
Yeah, Yanis Varoufakis, former finance minister of Greece during the financial crisis.
Oh, I totally thought Yanni was the Greek pronunciation of that.
Okay. I thought you were just being cheeky and giving him a little nickname there, shortening his name. You were like, good old Yanni. Me and Yanni were good friends.
That could be like insider pronunciation.
I think in Greece, in the Greek language, they pronounce their hard S there at the end. I don't think they would do silent IS at the end.
All right. Well, I apologize for being phonetically ignorant. Well, it's a new word, techno-feudalism. And speaking of new words, a lot of the shit, like trying to read new journal articles, this is a bit of a personal frustration of mine, is so many writers trying to make a name or be cutting edge by making up words and throwing them against the wall and hoping they stick and like catch on. And if they do catch on, you kind of have a career. If enough people are citing you, that's one of the measures of academic success. So coining the right word at the right time is a fucking great career move. But these days, it's adding a lot of prefixes like neo hyper post to words to freshen them up. Neo-materialism is one that I came across lately, and I don't know why it's neo-materialism as opposed to just materialism. Was there a problem with old materialism? Or hyper object? I know, Eric, you like the term hyper object, but is it really required? I'm not sure. It's doing the citations collection work.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty good in terms of new materialism, right? It's a kind of new it's a new theoretical paradigm that's coming out of people like, exploring post-Marxist, post-liberal kinds of discourses, right?
Adding posts.
Well, I'm using it as a kind of temporal thing, I guess, because, post-Marxism would be,
What about meta-Marxism? Where's meta-Marxism at?
I don't even give a fuck about meta stuff.
I guarantee you, if you search that, it's a thing.
Post-Marxism is just like kind of moving past Marxism, trying to look at other theorists and trying to move past the sort of Marxist framework. Whether or not you agree that's a worthwhile endeavor is besides the point. That's just giving the name to the new movement.
Old name, new movement. Why don't you just take Marx's name off of it then?
But new materialism specifically focuses on like the non-discursive and the bodily and the phenomenological. And it puts emphasis on different things. So marks itself out as a new paradigm. You can read collections of books right now that are written about it.
Do you see this a lot in political theory, Victor? I'm sure. I guarantee that if I search in hyper democracy, there's going to be something that comes up.
I mean, there is. So I just searched meta-Marxism, by the way, and I found the abstract to a chapter in some book, and it's like examination of any total explanation of all that is faces seemingly insuperable difficulties. Insuperable, is that a word? Superable?
Yeah.
Okay. Insuperable difficulties multiplied in the present instance by the claim to do so in the context of the interplay of the four principal streams of contemporary thought. The inside examiner can be trapped by the totality of the explanation and by his commitment to the view in question. The outsider can be accused of dogmatism by applying something foreign.
Enough of that.
Yeah, that's.
See, here's the problem.
That is not an explanation of what meta-Marxism is. That's weird.
Also, all the ones with postmodernism, those are the most blatant, because there's postmodernism, trans-postmodernism, digimodernism, pseudo-modernism, alter-modernism, and now meta-modernism is something that some group is trying to make happen, and a few people have asked me about it. Just don't worry about it, okay? Postmodernism is not done. If it even started, modernism was not modern anyway, so
yeah,
we should just call it all. Logos was wrong all along.
I think people also just enjoy, like, I guess there might just be a kind of pleasure associated with term coinage, and some of it might be aesthetic, some of it there might be some utility to it in the sense that like you're putting your thumb on like a very nuanced, specific way of identifying a phenomenon. Although broadly, I would say I'm sympathetic to your kind of intuition pills that there's also something kind of like, yeah, I don't know what it is. There does sometimes you get an odor of like, oh, I'm just trying to find my space. There's like an incentive, I guess, to be unique in academia and to be like, I've coined something, right? So there is that incentive as well. There's one term. This is kind of tangentially related, but sometimes I find it irritating or puzzling the way words from academia end up getting co-opted in certain kind of activist spaces. So one observation I've had, and I would actually love kind of an audience member to correct me on this, but has anybody noticed that when like leftist, like BLM protesters or like people who are involved in anti-racism, right? And as someone myself, I'm obviously sympathetic and support anti-racism, but I notice that there's this way in which they talk about black bodies, right? They'll say like black bodies instead of black people. And I don't know if anyone else and I feel like that's from academia. That's like some Foucauldian thing that came over from like the way bodies are treated by like power structures.
Yeah, biopolitics.
But I guess I just find it puzzling because it seems so dehumanizing to me. Like, shouldn't we in our discourse be talking about black people, not black bodies? Like, I don't understand. So somebody explain to me sort of like I would love to hear like an explanation for why it's more humanizing or like furthers anti-racism to talk about black bodies instead of black people. I don't know. It's confusing.
It's because you're a lib. That's why.
Yeah, it's because they're not emphasizing the person, personality, personological, right? Those are liberal concepts. Those are bourgeois concepts. They're emphasizing materiality of the body, the embodiment that is required of every consciousness to be embodied, but also the way that the body can be inscribed like a surface with meaning, right? You know, like marginalized peoples are marginalized bodies because of certain features, certain ways they look, certain things like that. So when you're talking about bodies, I guess you're adopting that sort of, Foucauldian kind of theoretical heritage, but it has a use. It has a point. Is talking about persons would be assuming like a liberal subject, and that's not what we want to do.
Well, I mean, I understand the theoretical utility, but I don't understand the kind of like activist utility.
Well, from the position, like the Foucauldian position, the state that you're dealing with, or the power discourse, wouldn't see the people, they would see bodies. So I think you're kind of right in that it's meant to be dehumanizing so that you can analyze the vision that the state has of bodies. But I don't think you would reassert. Yeah, you're pointing out a paradox. You wouldn't call yourself the body because that is the same dehumanizing that the state originally performed.
Well, that's the thing. So that's exactly my point. Like, so I understand like the theoretical point about like the way the state like see, but it's just funny to hear activists who presumably their whole goal is to like humanize, is to like bring back, but they continue to talk about like people being marginalized as bodies. And it's just strange to me, because shouldn't the goal, like the kind of activist utility, be to like actually humanize and raise up and like stop perpetuating this biopolitical phenomenon or whatever? So I don't know. It just seems strange to me. And that's where like I feel like there's a bleed from academic discourse. And it's like, oh, you're just like doing the thing that you're criticizing in a way, like inadvertently.
I mean, I'd like to see, we have to put a pin in this, because if you're going to interpret something, you actually have to have an example in front of you. And just because the term is used doesn't mean that everybody knows like exactly what it's used for. But there is an activist position, which would be to describe yourself as the way that the state describes you self-reflexively, which would be to account for your experience by the way that you are, not the way you see yourself as a person, but by the way you are disciplined. And the interpolation of that would imply the critique. So I don't think that would be an incorrect usage.
I mean, it's a theoretical point, right? All language is theoretically laden. And when you're doing activism, right, you need theory to guide your actions. Just like when you go into the market to buy things, you generally have a theory of how the market works and how you can get what you want out of it. It doesn't make sense to say to go into somewhere without a theory of what's going on or about how to address the issues. So, I mean, the sorts of things that activists choose from the theory world that's most conducive to their activity tends to be the language of materiality, right? Which takes the form of bodies in the Foucauldian heritage, or if you're a Marxist, it takes the form of labor, which is a productive activity, which again involves materialism, right? So it emphasizes the materialism instead of dematerializing people by referring to them as subjects or persons or minds or whatever, right? You materialize because it's the material conditions that determine whether or not a person can be free, whether or not a person will be considered a person in the first place, right? So bodies is a kind of, yes, it's theoretically latent, but it also guides the activities.
To put a pin in it, I found like I just did a quick Google search. I found like a medium.com article from I don't know, Aisha C. I'm not sure if she what else she's written, but like she has a think piece that just says, "Can we stop referring to black people as black bodies, please?" So I guess I'm not the only one who's made that observation.
The words we haven't accomplished so much, but if we invent some more, it doesn't cost anything to do it. Fallow-capitalism. We don't have that one yet, I don't think, do we?
Fallow-capitalism?
I'll Google it.
Phallogocentrism.
Oh my God. I just searched it. We do have fallow-capitalism.
Of course, we have everything.
No, I was referring to, Derrida did this to great success and fame and fortune, maybe. So it's like he's partially responsible for this. Phallogocentrism is one of the grievous neologisms. Why don't we just do ad-libs? We could just do ad-libs where we combine a prefix with like a critical theory word, and then you have to come up with the definition of it. There's like neo, fallow, super, meta. Actually, no, let's just do this right now. I'm going to go. We'll do add capitalism, pragmatism, subjectivity, fascism, and then you have to come. I'm going to go get a D6. Actually, hold on. I'm going to make make you come up with a definition of a word.
Oh my God. This is like kind of like a poetry word game. We'll just let him cut out the part where he's going to get stuff.
Yeah.
All right. This is actually happening. Okay. So I got a bunch of words here. Sorry. I'll just cut this bit out. Eric, you have to do the first word. Actually, I'll give all three of us a word, and then you have to come up with a definition on the spot.
All right, roll that.
So your
D6.
word is neo, is the prefix. Fascism. Never mind. Don't do that one. That one sucks.
Neo-fascism.
Don't do that one. That was too easy. Okay. Fallow. Fallow-pragmatism is your word.
Fallow-pragmatism.
Victor, while you're thinking, I'll give Victor his, and then I'll do it for myself. Yours is neo-fascism also. Fuck. The dice really... I'll skip that one. Super subjectivity.
Okay.
You got to get
Okay.
it. You got to get into that Whitehead. Whitehead actually already did
All
that
right.
term. But...
Okay.
I don't know Whitehead.
And
but-
here's
Okay.
me. Here's me. Cyber. That's a good start. Good. Cyber structuralism.
I mean, in a way, fallow-pragmatism. It's kind of an easy one. Because all the pragmatists I could think of before Rawl, or before, I don't know, are all males.
Oh,
right?
so this is a feminist critique of
It's a critical
the pragmatist tradition?
Yeah, it's a critical word for the patriarchal origins of pragmatism, especially that of Rorty and Dewey, because they impose a kind of cultural relativism on us that's secretly a hyper-patriarchal view of use and pragmatic action.
Yeah,
there you go.
The pragmatic is embedded in there as man as the active subject, woman as the passive subject.
In the androcene, fallow-pragmatism reigns.
Nice. See, this is not
okay.
even difficult. Now you have like a dissertation chapter.
Okay.
Super subjectivity.
Super subjectivity. Yeah. So to figure this out, I was like trying to find the etymology of super to see like if I could come up with anything based on that.
It's like
And I see that it's
above.
or above or beyond to great extreme degree. Yeah, above, beyond, exactly. That's the main thing. So I guess like I would say that super subjectivity is like the ongoing process with which our subjectivity becomes interfaced with. I'm gonna like apply maybe like a cybernetic lens to it, but there's probably another word that identifies this. But I guess like super subjectivity is like the subjectivity of all of us being connected through like the new subjectivity that emerges as a result of our interaction with each other through these mediums.
Oh, kind of like a superorganism, a super subject.
So it's like the result of, I guess, maybe when the interaction of subjectivities through cybernetic platforms becomes somehow self-conscious of itself. That's like the super subjectivity.
So
That's cool.
Cyber super subjectivity.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
the way that the modern media knits together all of our subjectivities into a single entity that reacts and acts together.
Whitehead does actually have a term called the superject.
Oh, really? What does that mean?
That's closer to a universal idea.
What
isn't
we
it?
call the subject, he calls the superject, because for him, even any sort of interaction involves two subjects.
But we could also say that the super subjectivity could just be like another word for Hegel's like absolute, the super subject.
Okay, and I have to do cyberstructuralism. With
Cyberstructuralism, that's good.
With the critiques of structuralism by Jacques Derrida and Roland Barthes, there have been many new interesting connections made. Okay, I'm trying to present this. I can't keep going with this. I think we can use cyberstructuralism to evaluate the cybernetic production of communities in spaces that are mediated by technology. And we can observe that all online communities are based on 3 levels of unconscious expression, beginning at the bottom with the zoanthropes, so the cat people, the cat boys. That's the animal. Then the imaginary. The imaginary will be the second layer of human consciousness embodied by the anime avatars. And finally, who do we put at the top? The sigmas? The sigmas, because it's a Greek letter, expresses the linguistic aspect of human consciousness. So there we go. That is a cyberstructuralism.
I decided that.
And Levi-Strauss would be proud.
Actually, I decided that super subjectivity is really just another, like an academic way of identifying the sigma.
See, we have a new unified theory, and it only took us 6 dice rolls and 10 minutes.
Because it's beyond. Because sigma is beyond the categorization, right? It like doesn't fit into the spectrum. So it's just
the
its own thing.
remainder.
It's beyond
the excess.
Hey, that's a fun game. Everybody coin your own terms.
That is a fun game. We should do that
We should
do that every week. We should start the show every
like the walrus things in South Park. You just choose the balls and then make something up based on what comes out.
It's a perfect Family Guy episode.
Yeah. Gary Coleman.
All right, why don't we get to our neologism of the day today, which is techno-feudalism. We watched a lecture, and techno-feudalism is Yanis Varoufakis' word for something that's concurrent with capitalism. I'm just going to insert the clip so we don't have to rehash that.
I think it's good to just
are you
as a segue.
Are you interrupting before the clip or after the clip?
Either one.
Okay.
You decide based on what I say, which is that as a kind of segue into talking about techno-feudalism from capitalism, I just evoke actually Zizek's sort of opening for that is that the public use of reason is under threat. That's the kind of emblem of the talk, is that the public use of reason is under threat and the private use of reason is on the rise. And I think that's a great way to distinguish useless neologisms from useful neologisms, is that are they made in the service of public reason to help people understand, or are they made for private gain or to reinforce existing structures and existing institutions? Are they a kind of method of, economic calculation, the way we coin new terms to get ahead in the academic rat race, the way we coin buzzwords to make our products seem more appealing, and those sorts of ideas are the ways that economists and law and jurists will come up with terms to, make a ridiculous process like money printing sound like something good, like quantitative easing, when it really just means printing fucking money and nothing else. Is it being used in the sense of private reasoning or public reasoning as
Could you define like the public use of reason in this context?
Yeah, the public use of reasoning is a distinction Kant made. So public use of reasoning is different from private use of reasoning. If you watch the video, I don't really need to rehash it because this is Zizek's opening, but public use of reasoning is, in a good Kantian way, when you're reasoning according to the laws prescribed by rationality, right? When you're a rational individual, you don't require you're out of your immaturity of your reasoning. You don't need to be led by others. You think for yourself. In Kantian terms, it's the self-prescription of laws by rationality, right? You prescribe your own laws and you accord to them. You don't let other people tell you what to do. And when public reasoning comes along, right, in the Kantian sense, this is because you're having an open discussion with the public and public intellectuals involved in, it's like real talk, right? As opposed to private reasoning, which is interested. This is supposed to be disinterested reasoning.
Right.
And private reasoning is something that, if you're a clergy member, the church will determine things that you can say and cannot say. And for Kant, that's fine, as long as you can also have public reason.
Yeah, and it's worth adding, too, that this was like a distinction that Rawls also ran with. Like the whole point of Rawls's theory of justice was to determine principles that could be consistent with public use of reason.
Because laws are inherently coercive, right? You cannot make a just society based on laws. You cannot coerce people, as I've been learning about. You cannot coerce people into being good. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, whatever. But what those laws have to do is almost be internalized and reconfirmed in the individual mind through a process of critique, right? Critiquing the tools of cognition and consciousness and logic, right? And then, so you can't coerce people. You have to lead people into the growth that they need to have in order to become a reasonable, mature, self-sufficient individual in the Kantian sense, as opposed to leading people by the hand, which is private reasoning. I prescribe my reasons.
Wait, I need to get to this clip. Are we going to get to the clip?
Okay.
Can we do that first?
And this is techno-feudalism.
We can get to the clip.
The point is a neologism coined in the interest of public reason, not private reason, like buzzwords or fashionable nonsense or whatever other crap.
Wait, that's all we were saying with all of that? Okay, anyway, techno-feudalism, what is it? It means the end of capitalism in one sense, but it's also concurrent with capitalism in another sense. Here is Yanis explaining it. Insert.
There is something tremendous happening now in capitalism. It's no longer the old market, profit, productivity, and so on.
It's no longer capitalism.
Can you develop this?
Yeah. Since 2008, the great financial crash, capitalism is on a drip feed. It's being kept alive through constant injections of money from the central banks. That has never happened before. It started in 2008. In 1929, it didn't happen. That's why all the banks closed down. So the banking system and the stock exchange had 12 years of getting used to, becoming addicted to, central bank money being pumped their way during difficult moments. It's my crazy theory that capitalism has already evolved out of itself. It has been transformed into another system. And the reason why I say that is because, for me, capitalism requires two things. Firstly, profit to drive it. It's like, a petrol engine that needs petrol. Capitalism needs profit, private profit to drive it. Capital accumulation, as we Marxists used to say, okay? And the other thing is that exploitation takes place in markets. That's the whole point about capitalism. In feudalism, there was no market exploitation. You had the peasants, they were growing rubbish, wheat and potatoes and cauliflower, I don't know what it is, that they were growing, and then the sheriff, on behalf of the Lord, would come and take half of it, or 60% of it. There was no market, it was just expropriation. It is with the enclosures and the eviction of the peasants, who then become suppliers of labor at any price, that you have the creation of the working class and the labor market. There was no labor market before that. Okay? So exploitation takes place through markets. Money markets, land markets, house markets, labor markets. But now, after 12 years of the 2008 crisis and beyond, we have the replacement of profit by central bank money. That is the new fuel of the system, of this exploitative system. And the steady encroachment into the space of markets of platforms. Amazon, The moment you go into Amazon or Facebook, the moment you enter Facebook, you're outside of capitalism. You're not in capitalism anymore.
Because, explain.
Yeah, you go into Facebook, right? Let's say you want to sell your stuff, to advertise your business in Facebook. You go in, you use your credit card, you pay money to Zuckerberg, and some more people see your advertisements. You go in there to meet your friends. You want to advertise this evening. You go and pay money. One person owns the whole digital space. It is the equivalent of stepping outside in Ljubljana. Imagine, just science fiction for a moment. Imagine you step out in Ljubljana, on the streets of Ljubljana tonight, and you look around and you think, oh my God, all these buildings belong to one person. Everything that is traded in the shops that I see is controlled by one person who decides what prices are charged, what prices are not charged, who can trade, who can't trade, who can buy, who can't buy. And moreover, imagine that Ljubljana operated like Facebook does or Amazon does, whereby what your eyes see is determined by one person, by the algorithm of one person, who, if he wants you not to see something, you will never see it in that digital space. This is not a market. This is a fiefdom. It's a digital fiefdom. It's a platform. Those platforms make a lot of money.
So the left has been desperately trying to bring capitalism down, but he says they ran out of time. Capitalism brought itself down, or at least is in the process of bringing itself down. We are left here with the question of the market, because the market still exists in certain cases. And I guess the point here is that the bottom rung, the proletariat or the precariat, do not have any access to the market because they don't have any assets. So they become the people that are exploited by monopolistic corporations that own an entire space that there's no access to for anybody else. And they profit off your every click, your every view. They get to show you ads all day. They know what you're thinking, where you are, et cetera, et cetera. You're basically working with or providing value with a form of labor that is not traditionally labor.
Yeah. I mean, capitalism and market exploitation under this techno-feudalist claim is that, capitalism is on life support. Markets are on life support. They survive since 2008. They survive solely on enormous cash injections from the central banks. And what capitalism formerly ran on, as we heard, capitalism runs on two things: private profit and market exploitation. And private profit is dropping off. The laboring class is shrinking. And on the other hand, the central banks have taken on a completely different role, and they are supporting markets, which are on life support. But what we're seeing is the incursion of platforms into market space. Platforms are coming in and taking over. So when you go on Facebook, you're not in capitalism anymore. That's the claim, right? On Facebook, you're not in capitalism anymore. You're outside of capitalism because you're on a platform. And again, it becomes more like a feudal system there, because one person owns everything you see, and in fact determines, in this case, what you do and don't see. And they determine what you can and can't buy, who can buy, who can't buy, and they get a cut of every single transaction that happens on their platform. It's completely, according to Yanis, is outside of capitalism because it's a platform which is coming to replace markets. So you don't have those two things from capitalism anymore. You don't have market exploitation because nothing is profitable anymore, and the laboring class is shrinking, which is the key market, the labor market of capitalism. And you have the incursion of platforms replacing traditional markets. And those traditional markets, which are still around, are surviving only on these enormous cash injections from central banks. And he describes the kind of dynamics of those cash injections and the way they just sort of further impoverish people who already don't have the buying power, right? And not to mention the after 2008, right? This is the situation: massive cash injections and platforms. Which, as you remember, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all those major platforms today are were born in the mid 2000s, right? Just before the big crash. So just in fucking time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really interesting account. I really like Varoufakis. I find him very likable, and like I find his points to be like really insightful. In terms of like defining it as in or out of capitalism, I mean, I guess it reminds me there is like sometimes a kind of desire I find among theorists, although I guess he's technically an economist and not a theorist.
He's a Marxist economist, just like Marx was. Marx was Marx, and he was an economist.
Right. Like to kind of like the urge to like define a new age, like now we're leaving this age into this new age. Like, I don't know. I guess the couple of examples he has, like, so one thing that I found kind of interesting, and by the way, I read a little article that he wrote also for Project Syndicate, where he kind of also goes on to define techno-feudalism. But one of the things that I guess I was a bit confused about is he like the main example he uses is like Facebook and Google, but then he also mentions Amazon. And like, I guess, but then he doesn't explain how like Amazon applies to that same thing. Cause like, I get how there's like certain platforms that we all use, like Twitter, Facebook, they control everything that we use. But then like, I don't really understand how like Amazon's not just a capitalist. Like, I don't understand how Amazon is also techno-feudalist. And I didn't notice him explain that. He just kind of mentioned it and bunched it up with these other things. And it seems a bit different to me.
Isn't it just like Amazon is the same thing? It's a platform. When you go on to Amazon, you're not in a mall. You're not in a free market. You're in a completely different place. You're not in a market. You're on a platform. And it's not, laws and legislation by some central body that determines the platform's rules. It's a single person. It's Jeff Bezos who determines what you see, what you don't see, what you can buy, what you can't buy, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same thing.
The thing is, Amazon has competitors.
Yeah.
Though, so I agree with what you're saying. It's you can still buy from, or just
eBay,
or just like
Alibaba. You can buy from
I'm
any
thinking of
retail
retail
store
stores,
online.
but they're all like particular to Canada or North America. So I don't want to. Yeah, like.
Well, Best Buy.
Are they
Best Buy, you can buy
significant
stuff on Best Buy. You can buy
competitors,
stuff.
though? I mean,
I think eBay is a significant competitor. So is, I think a lot of these different retailers are. Walmart, you can buy online. It's true. Like, if anything, I would say that Amazon is becoming like a bit monopolistic, but that's still like a part of capitalism, right? Like being a monopoly is a capitalist phenomenon, right? So I don't,
Look at the liberal is quoting Lenin. Thank you very much, Victor. And anyway, just to the point. What he's saying is like when you're on the platform becomes the dictator of everything that happens within that platform rather than the market. So on Amazon, it's a fiefdom. It's not the only fiefdom that exists, but once you're within Amazon, then every decision that can be made there is made by Amazon's directors.
Yeah, it's like those old brick and mortar stores like Amazon. Not like Amazon, like Walmart, what you were saying. Those are still capitalist spaces. But even when you shop online and buy stuff from whatever, Walmart, Best Buy, whatever, online, you're still kind of being routed through a capitalist system. And with Amazon, it's completely different. Right, because they own the platform, they own the means of transportation, they own the supply lines, they own everything from like the point of consumption almost right back to the point of production. And even when you have control of the point of production, Amazon can do basically whatever they want. They set the terms, not the producers.
Yeah,
but even then, it still seems like there's something to the idea that it's not a market, it's a platform. There's a distinction to be made there.
And we should be clear, it's not like capitalism has disappeared. It's just that we have capitalism plus this other thing. And here's a bit of a
life support.
Here's a bit of a provocative question. With the neologism thing, is the techno required here, or is all feudalism already techno-feudalism? The techno here just means it's managed by phone data specifically, but feudalism is never non-technological, whether you own all the good horses while the church keeps everyone distracted, or you own all the good servers while Ariana Grande keeps you distracted it's sort of the same mechanism, no?
Yeah, maybe techno is not the greatest term. Maybe neo-feudalism. I don't know.
Just put
but
2 at the end.
Something.
Feudalism 2.
It's like something
Or feudalism
new
again.
Let's just put the whole word there, right? Something new. We don't know what it is yet, but it seems like it's not capitalism, and it has very similar traits to feudalism from before capitalism. Like that's being contracted into one word, techno-feudalism, right? So
what I find, I think, like, I guess like the difficulty I have with these kinds of like coining new ways of talking about or a new age is that like I end up getting a bit fixated on like, well, what's the definition of feudalism? What's the definition of capitalism? And then like, is it really the same as and then it's like, well, and then I all of a sudden kind of snap out of it, and I'm like, well, who cares? Like the phenomenon he's pointing out like makes sense, right? Like that is happening. Like people are. So like, I guess on the one hand, like I agree with what he says about how this is sort of like changing our economy and like, but I don't know if I agree. Like, and I also don't care if it is feudalism or if it is like, who cares? Like, it kind of reminds me of the thing I kind of harp on often, like back when there was that whole discussion about whether Trump is a fascist or not. And it's like, everyone wants to call him a fascist. And it's like, who gives a shit? Just like point to the specific things that he does that are bad and condemn those. And it's like, here, is it feudalism? Is it not? Like, I kind of think, who gives a shit? Let's just point out the shitty things that are happening specifically so that we can analyze them and make sense of them. I don't think the term is that useful, and I don't find myself, I feel agnostic and somewhat unconvinced that it really is something new, and I also just don't think it matters.
I don't know. I think it's pretty important. I mean, I'm always saying, we shouldn't fetishize definitions, but at the same time, they're important because it acts like, what Lacan call a point de capitant. It kind of brings all of these forces into relief and gives them a kind of unity. And if they don't really have it, then maybe future critique will, hone the concept or change it to reflect reality a little bit better. But I mean, we define things all the time based on, what is the age of majority? When are you an adult, right? Is that not an important definition? Is it not important if that girl you're trying to sleep with is 15 years old or 18 years old? I guess it doesn't matter because definitions just go out the window, right? What is a child, really, right? That's just a definition.
No.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm being flippant, obviously.
I don't think that's a.
But that's completely different because that's
analogy,
everyday life and not theory. But I don't see a big
No.
difference.
No. Here's the difference. The difference is that we are in the business of being like academic theoreticians. We are in the business of observing phenomena and making sense of them. And I guess my worry with these labels is that like, so feudalism, being able to call something new feudalism, it has a rhetorical power. It has a rhetorical appeal because it's like something that was bad that we got beyond. And then people can kind of feel good and be like, oh yeah, like of course Facebook and, Google, they're feudalistic. And it's like, we feel good and about condemning them for that. But then, like, I guess what I feel gets lost, which is more important, is like, well, what is the specific phenomenon that we're worried about? So, like, let's talk about the way that, like, now, because everyone relies on these platforms, it, like, creates a kind of catch-22, where it's like, how do we get out of them? Like, so I just feel like talking at the level of specificity is just better. And I worry about the rhetorical appeal of these terms that kind of, you can just be like, oh yeah, of course they're all feudalistic. Like, it's just, I don't know. It just seems when we're in the business of analyzing, of getting like a deep account of of social, economic, political phenomena, it's better to just dwell in the level of specificity.
Why would that worry you though? People get behind words, not academic definitions.
Rhetoric.
Well, it
worries
me
because an essential part.
Because it risks like ideological mystification, like, so where it obscures the specificity of the phenomenon. Like, I think that happened with
most people react to rhetoric. They don't react to specificity of phenomena.
All discourse has rhetoric, has a rhetorical component. Like, that's just language.
I guess as academics, I feel like we should be.
Who are you calling an academic?
So it depends on what context we're in, right? So like in the political activist context, where like we want to win hearts and minds, I get the utility of like calling it feudalism. But like in the business of just like trying to get an accurate account of social, political, economic phenomenon, I don't know how important it is.
All right.
Like to be able
Point
to.
taken. Point taken. Let's stop talking about talking and actually do what you're suggesting.
1 second.
No. Oh.
Yeah, 1 second.
Oh,
Let me
God.
just, one point about rhetoric. Okay, so, the three kinds of rhetoric, right? Of course, what Aristotle says, he appeals to our pathos. He appeals to ethos. He's an authority on the subject. But there's a third appeal, and it's called logos, is a rhetorical appeal, and you appeal to reasons. And he spends the next hour after that clip giving you all of the logos of this rhetorical argument. So rhetoric and logic are connected. When you make appeals to reason, you're using logos. And I think he gives us good, measurable reasons to consider why it might be worth calling this techno-feudalism instead of techno-capitalism, because we've got a clear definition of capitalism I mentioned before, and now we have something potentially different that doesn't run on private property and market exploitation anymore, right? So maybe it is worth calling it something different. Maybe not feudalism, because that's a throwback term. Maybe something else. But again, and then you just get to the point, well, okay, now who gives a shit about the word techno-feudalism? Let's look at the reasons he gives for accepting such a symbol.
Let's do that now.
Exactly.
Let's
I agree.
do that
I agree
now.
with all that. Let's do that now. I agree. I
Leave
agree
it
with
to
all
us
that.
to just fucking talk about talking instead of actually talking. Okay,
No, but I think
whatever.
but I still
We're moving
think
on. The thing that you're looking for,
I think it was
Victor,
interesting.
is I know, but we only have like 20 minutes left. We've barely even addressed the term. The thing that we're looking for here is market participation, because that's the thing that didn't exist before capitalism, supposedly existed in capitalism, and now no longer exists. But he does do a lot of talking about what the state of capitalism today, non-techno-feudal companies like Apple and Volkswagen, he brings up a lot. And the point is that they are still in the market, but because they're just getting government handouts to buy back their own stock, then the asset prices for everything, for houses, are inflated such that there is no market participation for people like us who can't afford assets because they're way too fucking expensive. Then our only option is to become the employees for data corporations, which we are currently doing, actually.
Yeah, whether you like it or not, Google
Yeah.
tracks where you are and enriches its software through your free volunteer labor.
We're adding value to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts.
Yeah.
We are.
That's true. I mean, I will say that when he brought up the Google Maps example, I have to confess that I was like, I love Google Maps. I guess, yes, of course, I think it's a little unfair the way they can just capture our data. On the other hand, I'm old enough to remember being like a young teenager or 11, 12 years old and going on the early internet. And then back then, if there was some software, I was really interested in atlases and maps back then. And I remember there was atlas software.
Remember MapQuest?
But it was hundreds of dollars. Yeah, no, but this was before MapQuest, right? So this was even before that. And I remember the Encyclopedia Britannica or Encarta, Microsoft Encarta.
Dude, I killed fucking weeks on Encarta 95.
And so those things, they might have had an atlas, and I remember being like, oh man, and I looked and it was $300, $400, and it's and then all of a sudden Google Maps came out and it had satellite views, and I was like, I can just look at this for free? I understand that our data is being captured, but it's not like they're not giving us anything back in return.
But,
I mean, I love Google Maps. I was a big map nerd. There's a reason I studied urban planning as well for a little while. So I get it. They're taking advantage of it, but it's not like we're not getting anything that is. I consider it to improve my everyday life.
That's his sort of solution to this at the end is that we all become shareholders of these new rights that are being created. We should have a right to Google Maps, but we should also be shareholders of it.
Or at least we should have a right to dictate how our own data is used, perhaps own our own data. But his ultimate solution is corporate law reforms, right? Reform corporate ownership. That's the ultimate solution. He says he loves digital technology. He loves it. He says use it, right? Use it and improve your lives with it. But don't forget that even though it seems like Google's giving something back to you, as you said, are they really giving back something that wasn't just given to them in the first place? Are they just giving back something like utilizing our infrastructures that were funded by public money or even whatever military money, putting satellites in space? Google gets to tap into all those, pretend it belongs to them, and then give it back to us as if they're doing us a fucking favor. But because of the corporate ownership model that Google exists under, that Yanis says we should look at, the ownership is divided into a liquid ownership system of shares rather than...
Yeah, was he talking about... Was it clear to you whether he was talking about that those shares would be distributed to like all the employees or everybody? Like that wasn't clear to me.
I think he's just saying one vote, one share, and that's it. No non-transferable. I guess to whoever wants to buy one, right? He said, like, let's make shares into like library cards, right? They got your name on it. They give you certain privileges, but you can only have one and you can't sell them. That's kind of how.
Well, one of the interesting things that he said, I remember, was like, if you do that, the size of these companies will automatically go way down. And he said something like Google is like 200,000 employees.
Yeah.
But then it'll go down to like maybe 20,000, which is more. And that was confusing to me too. I wasn't exactly clear about like why that's the case. I mean, the thing is, one of the things I have to say, like watching this stuff, was like, you know, it's really compelling. Like Yanis Varoufakis is super compelling, but I'm also don't have almost any economics training. So like a lot of the stuff that he was saying, I just have no way of like verifying whether it makes sense or not. Like I just kind of have to take his word for it that like that's going to happen, or like that the math works out, right? But
to that,
so I was a little puzzled by that.
Specifically, he said you can't have 200,000 decision makers. It's impossible. You'd never do anything.
Right.
Yeah, that was 10,000 is about the upper limit.
Which is why I was also confused. So I was like, okay, so these shares are going to get distributed, but it can't just be to anybody, because if if it's limited to 10,000, then would it only be the employees? Like that's what made me think that maybe he was just talking about like when you work for a company, you get like a share, like a library card, right? Like,
yeah,
because if it's limited to 10,000.
I think we're going to have to wait for his next book for him to elaborate on that thing, which he said is coming out this year, hopefully. So we'll have to,
I'd be curious.
We'll have to wait to see. Maybe we'll do a follow-up episode when it comes out, pick up some of this stuff again. But I think the basic argument is fairly clear and doesn't require a whole lot of background economic knowledge. He does a pretty good job of, explaining first of all, what he was doing when he was a very, very briefly the Minister of Finance for Greece, and sort of then his overall sort of theory, right? He in August 2020, when British GDP was announced to have fallen 20%, 15 minutes later, the London Stock Exchange raised by 3%. And he said, that was the moment when I thought, okay, this isn't capitalism anymore. This is something different, because if GDP falls, then there's no way that the stock exchange should go up. That doesn't make sense. There's something else going on there. And that's when he gives the whole 2008 explanation, where since then, investors have become extremely used to, value falling, stock markets falling, and then getting a huge cash injection immediately after. So actually the expectation of getting that central bank money is what pushed the stock market up, which is not capitalism.
That is fucking
because what should push the stock market up under capitalism is real value being produced by workers in the factories. But that's not what's happening. It's a drip feed, he's saying, of money from central banks being handed to banks, being handed to corporations who use it, as Pills said, to buy back their own shares and increase their own values, which reflects no production whatsoever. It reflects no value creation.
Venture investment, like I think he mentioned, I don't know if this is still true, but I think at the time, like he was talking about how Uber still has never made a profit. They might have made a profit like recently for the first time, but like in general, like, yeah, they haven't made a profit. They've been living off of like venture capitalist, like kind of infusions, and speculative investment.
So it's weird to you that these investors are so sure that this quantitative easing is going to occur immediately that they're willing to like bet their profits on it, that it's that regular. I don't even pay attention to this shit, but that they can bank on the government just injecting money whenever there's like a bad report. That's fucking crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's that
Yeah, it is
socialism for the wealthy kind of idea, right? They get the handouts.
And this leads
And then
to, again, no faith in the government. And he said this, he gave this little recipe, Victor, that you can probably connect with easier than the economic stuff. He said, if you have a combination of bullshit jobs, absolutely no promise of access to assets, which was what kept this going for so long in the first place, then no faith in the government, because the government keeps doing shit like this in plain sight, just because everybody's too busy arguing about Ben Shapiro on Twitter, then this is a gift to fascism. This is the exact conditions in which fascism thrives.
Yeah, no,
Which is ironic because it's the same condition he said he needed to exploit when he was the finance minister of Greece,
Yeah.
which shows you.
Yeah, that was interesting.
I mean, it's an opportunistic thing. He was a politician, blah, 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 whatever. But I mean, it's the situation that's created that allows. I mean, I would trust Yanis to intervene in such a way that would be beneficial, but then you can't trust everybody to do that. Creates the openings for fascists to create.
Well, I think a lot of people. I actually read an article. I think it was an article. I don't know. I saw something, and I've seen this come up a couple times. I've seen this argument brought up a few times, and I think it was in reference to like the January 6th stuff. And the opinion was basically like, hey, we need to like not forget that like a lot of the reason why this is happening is the financial crisis, right? That like a lot of the reason why like Trumpism and like the rise of all this stuff, like we can trace its roots back to kind of like a loss of faith in like institutional stability, economic stability, being able to just like get a job that you can live off of, like the kind of the end of all that. And I find that to be pretty convincing. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, 2008 was our Black Friday, right? It was huge, and it really just, I mean, for this argument. And I think it's quite right that 2008 completely changed the landscape of the future, and it created opportunities for centralizations of wealth, which is, again, another basis for techno-feudalism to work, right? Because you only have the central banks only need to worry about a much smaller group of people who hold all the money rather than having a much more equally distributed kind of wealth, which would then...
One of the main things that he doesn't seem worried about, or at least has an explanation for, that you hear a lot on like, I don't know, CNN or NBC or whatever, that inflation's going to take over if we were to adopt certain policies. And he says we have all the conditions for inflation and we're not seeing any inflation because of this whole buyback process.
Yeah. This is him just countering the kind of traditional right-wing economic take, is if you do these massive cash injections, you're going to create all this inflation and price everybody out of the markets. But the reason it doesn't happen is because of some of the stuff we already went over, right? Like, after 2008 there's this proliferation of precarity and bullshit jobs going from what was already bad to worse in many cases, right? We all know what happened in the immediate aftermath of 2008, but also because wealth had become so concentrated in the hands of a few, so that you couldn't, when the banks get all these cash injections, they're not going to give them out as loans anymore, right? Like, they're not giving out. I mean, I guess they kind of are again a little bit, but they're not being as reckless with, say, that like those mortgage lending they were doing that led up to the 2008 crash.
Yeah, like the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
those so-called AAA loans. You go watch The Big Short to learn all about that stuff. They're not doing it anymore.
Yeah, it's like the one fucking thing they learned from the financial crisis is not to give money to regular people. So regular people will just, I guess, never have any assets again for the rest of time. That's why feudalism is kind of a perfect word.
I mean, that seems like the case now with capitalism supposedly on life support, right? It's just the idea that, prices are actually dropping for basic things, but like you said, the asset market prices are going up, and it is precisely because of job precarity. There's not a lot of money. like income equality has gone way down. So when the central banks get the money from the European bank, for instance, and then they're going to lend it to, Volkswagen as his example, who instead of creating a competitor car with Tesla to break into the car market, get their own competing model out there, they're not doing that anymore, right? Because people don't have the liquid funding. They don't have the liquidity to buy any of that stuff. So instead, they take the money, they go to the stock market, and they buy back their own shares and increase their share value, which increases their private wealth, as opposed to expropriating wealth from markets in that way. So that's one reason. And then the other reason, again, is private equity firms, right? They don't make profits. What they do is they go in, they buy a company, they split it into the service side and the physical asset side. They take loans out based on the physical asset side, and then they pay themselves back for that. Again, increasing their share value, but not really creating any value in the old sort of theory of labor sense. They're not creating any new value there. They're paying themselves. They're aggregating money. So no new value being created means no inflation in this whole situation. I guess that's my sort of normie non-economic take based on what he said about this. So you get higher prices for things like houses and like that sort of stuff, but then you get labor problems that prevent people from breaking into those markets. So it's just the pattern that's going. So life support just means, yeah, exactly, no prospects for the future until something radically changes. And then
And plus, since all the value is in like physical assets and then bonuses to the CEOs, then the company doesn't have to pay taxes because they didn't make any profit.
Yeah, that's capital gains tax. There's no capital gains.
So it never goes back to the public. Plus, they can hire, drivers or delivery guys as like cheap contractors that have to use their own cars for their job, and without having to pay any benefits of it. So nothing ever returns to the public. It just gets siphoned increasingly towards the top.
Into corporate
CEOs
bank
who
accounts.
give themselves bonuses.
Yeah, he was saying, some of these corporations have huge savings accounts now. They've never had that before. Why is that? Normally, when they make money, it's already spoken for, right? Because they have these sort of, on-demand shipping and really tightly coordinated supply lines. So that money is usually just spoken for, right? As soon as they get it, it goes back out, generates some new transactions, right? But now, because again, with COVID too, the supply lines have broken down. The futures markets are all backed up. And whoever bought the next wave of, say, transportation space or the rights to access a certain market, whoever has those that privilege is being pushed back into the future. And so you have buildups of products, you have buildups of savings accounts that never were there before. And you have these sort of private equity strategies that Facebook is doing to, say, the national health, where they're just taking money right out of the system without giving any back in the form of taxes. So you don't have inflation in the way that we would normally expect it to happen when you just print money and devalue currency and those sorts of things. Because again, it's operating according to a new logic, not late capitalism, but early techno-feudalism.
Did you see this? I had a friend this week, actually, and she bought a car like off a lot, and it was a used car. The lot called her back and said, we want to buy the car back for more than you bought it for. And I was like, what the fuck? What is happening? So I looked into it. The cost for used cars in Canada has gone up like 30 to 40% because there are no new cars because of the supply chain disruption. Because again, this thing was timed so that they didn't have to have any storage space for like the parts of a car and whatever. So the chip shortage, now you don't have this one part that you're 100% dependent on. Now everything is just sitting around and you can't make new cars. The price of used cars goes up to the point that someone who just sold it to you wants to buy it back because they realize they undervalued it. It's just so fucked. Also, I cannot get my goddamn video card.
Yeah, still video cards are
I am a video editor without a video card.
They are completely out of reach. Same with things like phones, right? I thought stuff was going to get so much better when Canada passed that law where they weren't allowed to lock phones anymore, and that I was thinking, oh, it's going to create this huge market of used phones and everything's going to be cheaper. Nope, that was all fucked up. That evaporated after 2008, that possibility, I'm guessing, but even more so with COVID and the supply line disruptions. But that system between sort of 2008 and the emergence of the pandemic, that was sort of working and not really creating any inflation. And then the supply line disruption really just kicked everything into the first gear, and now it's just all going to the shitter, and now we have to ask questions like, so how do we get out of this? What's next?
There's one more thing I wanted to bring up just to conclude this a little bit. At the end, Zizek and he sort of agreed on this point, and that was about rhetoric with China. So if I can recall it correctly, you're going to hear, and you already are hearing, with Trump and even with Biden, I think. I haven't been paying attention, to be honest. But I think the rhetoric is going to increase that, Cold War with China is going to be the enemy, et cetera, et cetera. And they kind of warn against this, which is something I've never thought about before, and I don't have enough knowledge to think about. But I'll just repeat what they said, basically. You're going to hear rhetoric about increasing antagonism with China. And that's because the business interests that control the United States, big tech and Wall Street, are not allowed into China. And that's why they are competitors, because there are no tech companies in the Eurozone, really, that can compete with Google and Facebook, because Google and Facebook are allowed there, so they can monopolize it. But China doesn't let them in, so they have these actual good competitors. I don't know what they are, Weibo, Alibaba, I think those are two of them. But they have actual competitors that Wall Street cannot put their money in. So the source of this antagonism, the material source long back in the chain, is that these are competitors to US financial interests. And then we get it trickled down in the rhetoric that's saying we're going to have a Cold War with China. And then all the anti-China rhetoric is actually based in that financial lockout or that financial interest.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really interesting point. I mean, I've really sympathized with the people who listen to this and sort of, they look to China as a kind of possible alternative model to sort of American capitalism. But I mean, obviously, as a politician, he kind of says, of course we have to say, the authoritarianism of the Chinese regime needs to be called out and opposed. Everything that goes on with the Uyghurs and the student protests in Hong Kong and the ridiculous situation around Taiwan, all that stuff needs to be criticized. But we have to remember that China is not an imperialist country. It never has been. It's never held colonies. It's never even been colonized in its entirety. Only little pieces of it have been. So it's not a colonial power. So what it does is, like you said, it engages in mutually beneficial trading as opposed to sort of the predatory kind of capitalist techniques that America uses, right? And so Trump started this, and because, the Eurozone is what he called an investment desert for big tech, and big tech is the future of, profits, we think. So who has the only competitors? China, right? So Trump started this war with Huawei, whose leader was held in a Canadian prison for quite some time, which is kind of strange. They wanted them expedited to America, all that shit. Biden's continuing it, not changing course, actually doubling down on it, because they want financial control of China, which is cut off from Wall Street, and they want control of the big tech market, which China again has cut off. So they're going to say, well, we're just not letting China build infrastructure anywhere, and not in Europe because they don't invest. Let's go to Africa. Well, we have to get China out of there, and we have to build our own infrastructure because they're going to spy on us, which they never do.
Well, I know I can't remember which country it was in, but it's an African country. China came in and offered to build this giant, governmental center for a Pan-African kind of governmental organization, and they mic'd the whole building. Like the whole building was mic'd up. Not that this is a thing to hold against them as opposed to the United States, because the United States has been doing that shit everywhere in the world for 60 years. But mutually beneficial, we'll say it's a little bit one-sided. But what they did say at the end of this talk was that leftists should not be like blindly pro-China, but they should look to those progressive elements in China that will inevitably rise up. I think it was Zizek who said inevitably, in a true Hegelian manner, that eventually there's going to be progressive elements up in China. But
yeah, the changes in the means of production will ultimately come into conflict with traditional relations, social relations, right?
They called them Confucian right-wingers, I guess. I have no idea about the politics of China, but that's interesting that we got our religious fundamentalist conservatives and they have their Confucian conservatives.
Yeah, that's one thing to look for in 2022 very carefully anyway, is the rhetoric around China and this whole Cold War thing is it shouldn't happen. It's got to be stopped. It cannot be in a Cold War, a potentially hot war. But another interesting thing that they pointed out too was the president of China Xi said that China's going to lower its growth target in 2022. They've engineered all of this growth. China has been a massive success in pulling people out of poverty, but now they're finding that the growth rate is creating class conflict with those right-wing sort of Chinese capitalists. And so Xi's going to step in and lower the growth rate target so that class antagonism fails to sort of get too bad. And that's part of the sort of progressive element that he was referring to in China, is that these progressive elements aren't going to be contained by this sort of American aggression, this sort of aggressive investing strategy. It's not going to be contained. But again, they also mentioned that the model of China is not sustainable, but we'll have to see what the future brings.
None of us are really qualified to talk about markets and global exchange, but we are kind of qualified to talk about rhetoric. So being fanatically pro-China or being fanatically anti-China, both of them are probably wrong.
Yeah, you got to be critical, but also open, I guess you'd say. Just not too
I'm going to
open.
be looking out for that anti-China rhetoric and where it's coming from, because I've never heard this kind of articulation before, that it's the financial interests that are being locked out, that somewhere are paying someone who's paying someone who's paying someone to stoke rhetoric of a Cold War. And of course you expect that, right? You of course assume that there's some financial interest behind everything we hear, but also at the bottom of it, materially, there's a lack of hope.
Yeah, and I think also just a big, at least in the American context too, just like such a big disappointment with Obama, right? Like he came in with all this hope and change message, and then he just ended up doing everything that those like Wall Street economists wanted him to do.
Same with Biden completely, I think.
I mean, Biden's in a different like that's not surprising though. In a way, I think like it was just more surprising in the context of Obama, because I think back at that time there was still a bit more faith that rhetoric would be true. We were coming out of 8 years of George W. Bush neoconservatism and like, kind of neo-imperialism, to use another term, right? Like in the Middle East, and everyone was like, okay, good, that era's over. Now we have a progressive who's going to come in and deal with this financial crisis and create opportunities. So I think it was just more, whereas with Biden, I feel like everybody who was voting for him knew that it was going to be, I don't think there was any real hope that Biden would actually like, bring in something new. Whereas I think with Obama, there really was a kind of hope that there'd be some change.
There was a pretty fire indictment that he gave about halfway through, which was equality and justice or equality and social justice are just bourgeois claptrap, and I don't believe in it at all. Just appealing to your bourgeois conscience. And liberating people actually requires changing the ownership of rights to have shares and who can own shares and how.
Yeah, he's just being a crypto normativist, though. He's like, these are just bourgeois concepts, but then let me make an argument that relies on normative beliefs about like the betterness of the world.
Well, you don't get.
That's not
true. I don't think liberals get to have a monopoly on normative arguments. It's just pointing out the flaw of one normative argument and offering another normative argument that's a lot better.
Well, I agree. I mean, I agree with that. I guess I just think that
critiquing the
I guess he's like
underlying
means
one
those things in a
normativity.
narrow way, but I guess it just seems to me that like he's arguing for a kind of social
Well,
justice, even though
it's
he's at the
social
same time,
washing, right? Just like we have greenwashing, they have kind of social justice washing, right? We see it all the time, especially the ways that corporations set up grassroots movements and fund charities and all that sort of way that capitalism launders itself into feeling like it's socially just and equitable and all that fucking messaging we get. And then like talk about activists picking up rhetoric. Then when activists who are kind of like centrists and pick up on this shit and go out and say, capitalism's good, we generally have a better quality of life than we had 100 years ago, blah, 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 all that bullshit, that is a direct reflection of it. It's just people parroting bourgeois talking points. It's not doing anything except, greenwashing, the social justice version of greenwashing.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with that. I mean, I would rather talk about something concrete that would make people's lives better the way Varoufakis was, as opposed to just like talking about the label of social justice and human rights or whatever. I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, that's right. I guess more what I was objecting to is like some idea that, we're not actually like, we don't believe in those things at all. Like you can say you don't believe in just like appealing to them. That's fine and being more specific, but just to be like.
That is what he said. He said it's nothing just words, but claptrap.
Yeah. And
okay. So maybe I misunderstood what he meant.
Yeah, that's our brief analysis of it. If you want to watch the full thing, it's worth watching. Zizek is quieter than I've ever seen him, actually.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was amazing.
I wonder if his mic was under control or if he just developed some self-control that...
I think he loves listening to Varoufakis. That was the sense I got. The sense I got was like, he's like, I think Varoufakis might be one of his like favorite people.
I'm here for that bromance for sure.
Yeah, he's pretty good at his moderator role. Anyway, I thought Zizek did awesome. I should mention.
Yeah, I think so too.
They didn't advertise this, I don't think, but the Progressive International is a thing that they're both part of, and I think it had something to do with putting on this talk. But the Progressive International is Zizek's on there, Varoufakis is on there, also Cornel West, Noam Chomsky, Corbyn, and it is an international organization that supports organizations in different countries. There's one Canadian guy that I saw that was in there too. So it's worth following if you wanna see what the international left is doing. I think there's enough clout on that council of members that
Nikki Ashton is the Canadian part of the NDP.
Oh, she's a member of the NDP.
Yeah, she's on there. The Council of the Progressive International.
Very cool.
They don't have a Patreon, but I think that's one thing I'm gonna join up.
That was fun. I enjoyed that, and we will talk again soon.
You've heard from us, and there's a lot more where this came from on the links in the description, so you can just watch it, see if you agree with our analysis of the neologism, which I think we all agree in this case is fine. Neologism can be annoying sometimes, of course, and play academic Mad Libs with your friends. I can.
It's fun. We should do that again. We should definitely do that again.
Just do it to Matt and not tell him what's happening.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We should surprise Matt on the next episode with the game.
Anyway, good to talk to you guys. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will be back next week.
All right.
Buy pills. Buy pill politics.